Okay, good morning, and good morning. Today we're going to focus on the practical aspects of the Seder, although we can't avoid throwing in some insights as well. But before we start with the Seder, before the person moves into a new home, they have to make sure that it's swept and it's cleaned from all the dust of the construction. So before Passover, before we get into the Seder, we get rid of the negative, which in the terms of Passover represents the Chametz. Chametz defined as anything that was prepared with grain, one of the 5 grains: wheat, barley, oats, rye, and spelt. Those are the 5 grains that if they come in contact with water and not prepared quickly enough, the right way, under the right conditions, that is automatically chametz. It doesn't need yeast to benefit from it. So you have to get rid of the ownership of it as well. Why are we so radical about chametz? Why do we so detest it? Because chametz represents the ego, the inflated ego, which is the source of all sins. And when it comes to Passover, the holiday, when we became a nation, this is where we developed our very nature and existence. The chametz is a symbol that we want to get rid of. And we get rid of it in drastic and radical ways, that we don't eat it, we don't derive benefit, we can't even feed it to our pet. You can't sell it during Passover, because that's a benefit, any kind of benefit, and you can't own it. Also, chametz is sometimes identified with a symbol of idolatry, because what is an idol? An idol is where you promote something that doesn't deserve to be promoted. And when people glorify themselves, that's also a form of idol worship. So ego is idol worship, and we get rid of every trace of idol worship. There's nothing more abhorrent to God than idolatry. And on Pesach, the Chametz assumes that symbol of idolatry. So that's why we go to lengths, to extremes, in divesting ourselves of Chametz. And that's one of the reasons why the rabbi is usually, the custom is that the people authorize the rabbi to serve as their agent. The rabbi is not allowed to own chametz either. Believe it or not, rabbis have to follow the law as well. So you're not selling it to the rabbi, and if you do sell it to the rabbi has to sell it to someone else before Passover. And that's what we do. You sign the document which authorizes me in our community to sell it to a non-Jew before Passover. After Passover, it's repurchased, it's bought back. If the non-Jew decides he wants to keep it, he gets to keep it, provided that we work out the cost of it. He has to pay for it.
Does monetary funds take place between you and that agent?
Yes, he gives a down payment. There's a contract.
How many contracts you have? That's how you.
Right. He gives a down payment. He not only buys the chametz, he also rents the space in which the chametz is placed, and he puts a down payment for that. It gets pretty complicated, but it's a very, very effective sale, so that the people who have chametz in their homes are not guilty of owning it. It's not enough not to eat it and use it, but you can't even own it. Yes?
Is money considered an idolatry?
It could become one. Anything could become idolatry. The smartphone, it could become an idol. Everything could be.
Are you allowed to handle money on Passover?
It depends which days. The first 2 days and last 2 days, no, but the intermediate 4 days, yes.
Unless it's Shabbat.
Unless it's to make from matzah meal foods that resemble chametz, like pizza and bagels and things like that. Some people, some people question why we could survive without those things for 8 days, but it's technically kosher if you do make it out of matzah meal or potato starch or other things.
Tropical fish.
Or from tropical fish, whatever. So we get rid of the chametz before Passover, and the night before Passover, this year, because Shabbat is the day before, it's 2 nights before, we search the home for chametz. We assume that the home was clean before Passover, but you search for chametz, and the next day, the chametz is burnt. There's a ceremony which takes place the next day before the deadline for chametz. I'm not going to talk much more about chametz, but I just wanted to make sure that we understand that before we start with a holiday, we first have to clean the premises where we live. Now we get into the Seder. The whole concept of the Seder is intended for us to experience the energy of true freedom. We spoke a lot about freedom in other classes. I'm not going to repeat everything, but that's what really we're trying to do when we sit down at the Seder. It's not just a nice time to family to get together, which is a beautiful thing in its own right, but it's much more than that. We're trying to plug into that energy, and that's what all the mitzvahs are intended for. Now, it may seem that we're focusing, when we get into all the laws, on trivia, on minutia. But when it comes to Judaism, there's no such thing as minutia, because the analogy from technology would be a perfect analogy. Your computer or whatever modern technological gimmick, Device, right. Whatever it may be, if one little screw is loose, it's not going to work. Remember that spaceship? It crashed because of a O-ring?
Oh, the shuttle.
It was the shuttle, yeah. Just one little detail off base could lead to disaster. So by the same token, when it comes to doing a mitzvah, every detail counts, because that's what gives you the power to plug into that energy. It's like a key, if you want to use a simpler analogy. If the key has the wrong groove, it's not going to open the lock. Every groove counts. Every little change in the key, in the metal, will determine whether you can get in or you can't get in. And that's why everything we do, every detail is important. Some details are more important than others, obviously, but they're all important. Passover is a holiday of paradoxes. The very term Passover Seder is an oxymoron, a paradox. Why? Because passing over means you're going beyond the order, and the word Seder means order. So even in Judaism, when we focus on going beyond the order, being radical and transcendent, it has to be channeled through a system of order. Another paradox of Passover, we're supposed to experience bondage and freedom. How do you do both? So there's a part of the Seder where you focus on the bondage, there's a part where you focus on the freedom, but you're supposed to try to experience both of these emotions and some of the things that we do. For example, the 4 cups of wine. Wine is a symbol of joy, and that's freedom. The bitter herbs, obviously, are there to remind us of the bitterness. So we gravitate to bitterness, and then we go from bitterness to liberation and joy. Another thing about Passover, that there's the whole idea of freedom is expansiveness, and yet we focus on the small details, as I just mentioned. So let's start off with the Seder plate. In many communities, in many homes, just the person who leads the Seder has a Seder plate, but there's no law that says that other people cannot have their own Seder plate. So if you want to make your own Seder plate, the Seder plate consists of 3 matzahs. Why 3 matzahs? Because the Jews are divided into 3 classes. There's the Kohen, and above the Kohen is the Levi, and then you have the Yisrael, the Israelite. So the Jews are divided into 3. 3 is a number that symbolizes the patriarchs and many other things. So we have the 3 matzahs. On top of the matzahs, we put a cloth, we cover the matzahs, and we have... What? We have 6... We have 6 items there. What are the 6 items? We have what's called the Zeroa. Zeroa is the Shankbone, or people mostly use a chicken neck. This is to symbolize the Pascal offering, which we don't have. So instead of the Pascal offering, we're not going to bring this as an offering, but it's a symbol to remind ourselves of the Pascal offering. That goes on the right side. There are different configurations in the Seder plates, but this is the one the Arizal, the great Kabbalist, established. So we put that on the right side above, and then opposite it, parallel to it on the left, is a hard-boiled egg. Why a hard-boiled egg? So when they brought the Pascal offering, they also had to bring another offering called the festival offering, which was the main course, actually. The Pascal offering was the dessert. It's not much of a dessert, but it would be eaten at the end of the meal. So to commemorate the festival offering, we have the hard-boiled egg. Also, other reasons are given that the hard-boiled egg is a symbol of mourning. Why are we mourning at the Seder? It's a joyous holiday. We're mourning the fact that we don't have the original, that we have to make a replica. We have to substitute without having the original sacrifices in the temple, because we don't have the temple right now. One great 19th century rabbi said something very beautiful about a hard-boiled egg. A hard-boiled egg is probably the only food that the more you cook it, the harder it gets. And describes the Jewish people. The more that we're oppressed, the tougher we get and the stronger we become. And that's what happened during the bondage in Egypt. The Jewish people were oppressed because the Egyptians were afraid of us. But the more we were oppressed, the more we grew, the more we proliferated. Then you have in the center, beneath those two, you have the bitter herbs, the Maror, as it's called. Now, what are bitter herbs? Most people identify bitter herbs as horseradish, and that's not incorrect, that's correct. But the Talmud says there are 5 kinds of plants that qualify for bitter herbs. The first and most preferred is actually something that is not bitter, romaine lettuce. And the Talmud explains, why is romaine lettuce the preferred way of using bitter herbs? Because the roots of the romaine lettuce start off as sweet, and they become extremely bitter if you leave them in the ground long enough. And that's how the bondage in Egypt developed. It started off with Pharaoh enticing the people to work, paying them handsomely, and getting them to feel that they're involved in a patriotic project, and little by little he caused them to become regimented into a slave workforce. So it started off sweet and it became very bitter. But many people, the other 3 are not known. Some people think the Belgian endives might also be one of the 5, but it's definite romaine lettuce and horseradish. The Chabad custom, as is the custom of many others, is to combine the 2, to take both romaine lettuce and horseradish and eat them together. I was there when the Rebbe had his Seder, and the Rebbe would take as much horseradish, probably, I'd say, a piece of gefilte, a whole big gefilte fish. Well, he would compress the horseradish into that size and wrap it up with 1 leaf of romaine lettuce. And he would cough terribly when he would eat it. And I think the Rebbe never explained why he took so much. And he also took a piece of horseradish, a solid piece, to add to that. And I think he wanted to feel the bitterness, take away some of the pain of others. So that's the 3rd item. Then you have the 4th item. Underneath on the right side of the Seder plate, a little bit lower down, you have the Charoset. Charoset is a mixture of nuts, apples, pears. Some people put certain types of spices, but there are different customs about that. And then we also add a little bit of red wine to resemble the mortar, the bricks that were built by the Jews as they were slaves in Egypt. And that's going to be used. We don't really eat Charoset on the Seder night. I know a lot of people like to eat it. You can eat it all you want the next day, but the Charoset is only used as a dip. We dip the bitter herbs into the Charoset, but it's mostly there for show on the Seder plate. On a parallel to it, on the left side, underneath the hard-boiled egg, we put what is called Karpas. Karpas is a vegetable. What kind of vegetable? It could be any vegetable except for bitter herbs. Everything else is good enough. Many people use, Chabad custom is to use an onion. The idea is not to eat too much of it. Maybe that's why we use an onion, because no one's going to eat too much of the onion. And then beneath it, in the middle, is another course of bitter herbs, whether it's romaine lettuce or the horseradish or both. That's going to be used for the sandwich we're going to have later. So that's the configuration of the Seder plate. Now, when does the Seder start? This is a very touchy subject. Unfortunately, daylight savings time is not good for the Jews. You know, everything that happens in the world, we always ask, is it good for the Jews or bad for the Jews? Are the bills winning good for the Jews or bad for the Jews? Well, the question is daylight savings time good for the Jews or bad for the Jews? And the answer is it's bad for the Jews. And the reason for that is, and there was an attempt that it should be daylight savings time throughout the year. That would be terrible for us. But I'm not going to go into all the reasons why, but for Passover, you can't start the Seder. In other words, you can't drink the first cup of wine, which is the first thing we do at the Seder, unless it's already dark outside. Right now, I don't know the exact time for next week, it's about 8:30, a little later than 8:30. It's around 8:30. I'll get the exact time later. So most people eat their dinner much earlier than that, and it's hard for them to come to a Seder that late, but that's the law. It has to be the night of Passover. It's not Passover before the night. So if you can't start it that late, you start the Seder before, do all the schmoozing and all the joking and all the social part and eating snacks kosher for Passover before you drink the first cup of wine. The first cup of wine should be drunk after nightfall. But on the other hand, we shouldn't delay much longer, because especially if there are children, you don't want them to fall asleep, because the highlight of the Seder is to respond to the questions of the children. You want the children to be part of it. And when we talk about the children, we're talking also about the child within us. We don't want that to fall asleep. We don't want people putting their heads down in the middle of the Seder, which happens, unfortunately. So now we get into the Seder itself, the 15 steps of the Seder. The first one is called Kadesh, sanctify. Every Shabbat, how do we usher in Shabbat? By reciting what is called Kiddush. We say a prayer focusing on the holiness of the Sabbath. Well, the same thing is true in every Jewish holiday. We recite Kiddush and we drink wine. But in this case, in Passover, that's one of the 4 cups of wine. So it has a special distinction in addition to what you do for every holiday. Now, the cup of wine should contain the amount that it has to contain, and here's where we get into little details, is it has to have at least 3.5 ounces, the cup. And ideally, and if the cup is 30 ounces, you have to drink all of it. And you have to drink it ideally within 1 gulp. So don't take a cup of 30 ounces, take a cup of 4 ounces or 5 ounces. And ideally you should drink the whole thing. If you can't drink the whole thing, at least most of it. But if you can't drink too much wine, and you could drink some wine, then take a small cup of about 3.5 ounces. It's actually 86 grams, so I don't know the exact amount in ounces, 86 grams. And try to do the whole thing, gulping the whole thing in 1 shot, if possible. If you can't do it in 1 shot, you can do it in a few shots, but you can't space it out and sip it. Sipping is not called drinking, and for the laws of Passover, you have to drink the wine. If you can't take wine, you could use kosher grape juice. It's not the same as wine, can't get drunk on it, and it doesn't give you a buzz. And part of the reason why we drink wine is we want a little bit of a buzz at a holiday. We want to get a little bit more joyous. You never knew a Yiddish word, buzz? Now, in all respects, women are no different from men when it comes to the Seder, except for one thing. We're supposed to recline at the Seder when we drink the wine and we eat the matzah. women are not required to recline. Now, what's the reason for that? Why this discrimination, this horrible discrimination? The reason is that the reason why we recline is because in Roman times, the aristocrats, the nobility, would eat on couches and they would recline when they would eat. And that was a symbol of freedom. But women, apparently in those days, did not do it, so it wouldn't be a symbol of freedom for them if they recline. It would just be imitating, and the point is not just to imitate, it's to actually engage in this liberating experience. But if a woman wants to recline, no one's going to shoot her. But men have to recline, and if they don't recline, according to some opinions, they'll have to redo the cup of wine and drink another cup. I know what some of you are thinking. Please punish me. You know, it reminds me of a story. There was this chassid who had a problem with alcohol, and was causing a lot of problems. So they went to his Rebbe, and the Rebbe ordered him to stop drinking. So he wouldn't take a drop of alcohol. A few years later, he developed some kind of an illness, and the medication he needed had alcohol in it, and he refused to take it. They said, absolutely, I won't take it. The Rebbe told him not to drink alcohol. So they go to the Rebbe, and they tell the Rebbe, this man needs the medicine, and he refuses to take it. So the Rebbe calls him in and says, he calls in the people, his friends, and says, get two very husky guys to hold him down and take a third person to pour the medicine down his throat. So these three guys come into the room with him, and he says, what's this all about? He says, well, the Rebbe said we should take two of these strong guys to hold you down, and the third guy will pour the alcohol down your throat. He says, oh, the Rebbe said that? He says, well, let one guy hold me and two pour the wine, the alcohol down my throat. So. Okay, the next thing we do is Urchatz, wash. Before we eat bread, we wash our hands throughout the year. But there's an opinion that says, and I'm not going to go into the technicalities of it, there's an opinion that says that you have to wash your hands ritually before you eat any food that has become moistened, that has become wet. We don't follow that opinion. That opinion is not the definitive view. But on the night of Passover, we do things differently. That's one of the things that runs throughout the entire Seder, is we try to do things a little different from the way we do them throughout the year. So it piques the curiosity of the children and of the child in us to ask questions. Asking questions is really the most desired thing in the night of Passover. People should look to ask questions, especially the children. So some things we do differently just to get people to realize that we're doing things differently. There's something different about tonight. So one of the things we do differently is we wash our hands before we're going to dip the vegetable in the salt water, because according to one opinion requires washing ritually. But since it's not the final opinion about these things, we don't recite the blessing. Normally when we wash our hands before eating bread, there's a special blessing that we recite, but since we don't follow that opinion, we're only doing it now, we don't say that blessing. Then we take, the next step is called Karpas, a vegetable. Some translate Karpas as parsley. It doesn't have to be parsley, it could be any vegetable other than bitter herbs. And we dip that in salt water. Now, what vegetables do people use? You can use parsley, you could use onion, you could use a potato, you could use a cucumber, you could use any vegetable. What's the significance behind this? The significance of Karpas is, number one, the dip is something we normally don't do. So it's to get the child to start asking questions. Why are we dipping now? We're not eating yet. But there's also a symbolism in the word Karpas. If you write the word Karpas backwards, it spells Samach Perech, 60 back-breaking labor. What does that mean, 60? There was 60 10,000 Jews. In Hebrew, there's no number beyond 10,000. You have numbers from 1 to 100 to 1,000, 10,000, that's it. There's no number for 11,000. You'd have to say 10,000 plus 1,000. So how do you say 600,000? There was 600,000 Jews in Egypt at that time. So how do we say 600,000? By saying 60 10,000s. So Karpas represents the 60 10,000 Jews who were subjected to back-breaking labor. And that's what it's supposed to remind us of. And there's a special blessing that whenever we eat a vegetable, there's a blessing which ends with the words Borei Pri Hadam, who creates the fruit of the earth. Then we do the fourth stage, is called Yachatz. Yachatz is breaking the middle matzah. Remember, we have 3 matzahs on the Seder plate. So whoever has a Seder plate takes the middle matzah and breaks it into 2, hoping that they're not the same size. The smaller half you leave between the sandwich in between the top and bottom matzah. The broken matzah is a symbol of the bread of affliction. The word in Hebrew for matzah is bread of affliction, or the poor man's bread. A poor person doesn't ever eat a whole loaf. He leaves half of it for the next day. So we keep less than a half of the matzah sandwich in. So when we say the Haggadah, when we recite the text of the Haggadah, we're influenced and inspired by the state of the poor person, of the afflicted person. That defines the experience. So we get into this experience in a very vivid way. And the larger half we hide. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to hide it, that no one should be able to find it. It means we put it away in a secure place, because that larger piece of matzah we're going to eat at the very end of the meal, the last thing we're going to be eating the night of the Seder. That's called the Afikoman. Literally, Afikoman means the dessert. That's the last piece. And that last piece is in place of the Pascal offering, according to one opinion. Now we're ready for the most important part of the Seder. The part of the Seder called Maggid, telling the story of the Exodus. That's what the biblical commandment is. We're supposed to tell the story, and that's what the word Haggadah means. Haggadah means the telling the story, and it's the main mitzvah of the night. But before we do this, we fill the second cup of wine, because when you say the Haggadah, you say it while the cup of wine is in front of you, to define the joy of the experience. So here you have this paradox where we have a broken matzah on one hand, and we have a full cup of wine on the other hand. We're mixing these 2 emotions, and we're alternating from one to the other. And this is a Jewish gift. Jews throughout history had to live through persecution, oppression, suffering, and pain. And at the same time, Jews were expected to be happy. They had to celebrate holidays. And somehow, God gave us this miraculous power to combine opposites. That's a divine miracle. That's one of the great miracles of Jewish life. So we relive this miracle at the night of the Seder. So we fill the second cup of wine. And at this point, the child or children ask the 4 questions. And the Chabad custom is that even the adults ask the 4 questions quietly. You don't have to press anyone that you could read it, but you can do it in an undertone while the child is asking the 4 questions. And the questions are questions about why Passover is different than all other nights, and the rest of the Haggadah is going to provide the answer. The answer is, of course, that we were slaves and we were freed, and all these things that we do relate to either the slavery or the freedom. And then we go on for a lengthy period telling the story of the Exodus and interpreting biblical verses that talk about the slavery and the Exodus. So that's the longest part of the Seder, of the recitation. I'm making it sound very brief, but it's the longest part. And that's followed by drinking the second cup of wine that we had poured, and we had it in front of us, then we drink the second cup of wine. Yes?
In the text in the Torah, the second cup would correspond to I will rescue you from the service, right?
Yeah.
So is that what, when you saying it, is that the mental thought that God is rescuing you at that point from their service?
Yeah. Yeah, that would be, that corresponds to the second expression, which is one of the reasons we have 4 cups of wine, because there are 4 expressions of redemption that the Torah uses. After we finish telling the story, which could take anywhere, if you say it quickly, you can do it in 15 minutes, it can take 5 hours. We then go back to washing our hands. Rachtzah, wash your hands again. Because now we're going to be eating the matzah. So we wash our hands for the matzah the same way we wash our hands before eating bread. We pour water on, covering the entire hand up to the wrist. Some people do it 2 times, some people do it 3 times to each hand. And there's a special blessing that we say whenever we wash our hands ritually. And then we take the 3 matzahs. Again, if you have the Seder plate. If you don't have the Seder plate, you just listen and watch, and then you take the matzah from the wherever the matzah is coming from. So the one who's doing the leading of the Seder holds all 3 matzahs and says the blessing Motzi. And then he drops the bottom matzah and only holds the 1.5 matzahs. And then says another blessing, which I left out over here by mistake. And the other blessing is thanking God not for the matzah, but for the mitzvah of eating matzah. So there are 2 different blessings. The first blessing is a blessing that thanking God for giving us food, giving us the bread. The second blessing is for thanking God that He gave us the opportunity to do the mitzvah of eating matzah. And when we eat, and we have to eat, again, the details are important, we have to eat at least 1 ounce of matzah. Now, it really goes by volume, but it's approximately 1 ounce. So if you're eating a square matzah, it's approximately 1/2 a matzah, maybe a little less than 1/2 a matzah. If you're eating one of the large, round, handmade matzah, it could be much less, 1/3 or 1/4 of the matzah. And you eat that piece within 4 minutes. Some opinions are a little bit more lenient and say 7 minutes or 9 minutes, but preferably within 4 minutes. And again, for reclining on the left. Why did I say reclining on the left? It's not a political statement. Reclining on the left, the Talmud says, is a health reason, because the passage to the lungs is less on the left than it is on the is more on the left than it is on the right. And there's less of a chance of choking, because when you're reclining, it's easier to choke than if you wouldn't recline. So the Talmud says we should be careful and only recline on the left. The next thing, after we finish eating that piece of matzah, I wouldn't encourage eating much more than you have to eat, because there's going to be a lot of matzah eating, and you have to leave room for especially the matzah at the end, the Afikoman. So the next thing is the bitter herbs. We eat, again, about 1 ounce, about 2 leaves of romaine lettuce, depending on how large the leaves are, of course, or horseradish, or the combination of both. And there's a special blessing that we recite for the mitzvah of eating the bitter herbs. But we also dip it in the charoset. Symbolically, we dip it and we don't even keep any of it on we're not supposed to have the taste of the charoset, we're supposed to have the taste of the bitter herbs. The charoset will take away the taste. And why do we have charoset there altogether? It's a reminder of the mortar that the people had to make when they were in Egypt. And in addition, and this is going to be a little gory, the reason why we add wine to the charoset is because it reminds us of the blood of the Jewish children that were thrown into the mortar when they didn't have enough mortar and to fill the quota that they were given. So it reminds us of the Jewish blood that was in the... Unfortunately, when it comes to being reminded of Jewish blood of children, we have it today with what happened in Gaza with the Bibas family. When we eat the bitter herbs, we do not recline, because that would be a contradiction. You're trying to feel the bitterness, and you're reclining, which is a symbol of freedom and joy. So even though we go from one feeling to another, there's a limit how much you could fuse the two together. Then we go to korech. Korech means a sandwich. They used to say that the person who invented the sandwich was a Mr. Sandwich, Sir Sandwich, something like that. Actually, it was Hillel, the famous sage. He was of the opinion, the other rabbis disagreed with him, but he was of the opinion that the Torah requires us to eat matzah, bitter herbs, and the Pascal lamb. So they can be eaten separately. So Hillel says, no, they have to be eaten together as a sandwich. So he would take the matzah and put the lamb and the bitter herbs in the matzah and eat it that way. Now you have to remember also that the matzah that people had those days, as some Sephardic Jews even to this day, is like pita. It's soft. Ashkenazic Jews for some reason never had the ability, they didn't have the knowledge to make matzah soft and not allowing it to become chametz. But the Sephardic Jews have that tradition. So it was like eating pita with lamb chops and some horseradish mixed into it. It was a very appetizing dish, but that wasn't the reason they did that. So we, even though that's not the universal opinion that you have to have the sandwich, we follow what Hillel did. And we, again, take the bottom matzah. You see, we started off using the top matzah and the middle matzah. I forgot to mention before that when after the blessing, you eat the piece of the top matzah and the middle matzah if you have a Seder plate. If you don't have a Seder plate, you just take matzah from wherever it comes and you eat that matzah. Now, the bottom matzah is used for the sandwich, which we, again, dip in Charoset, the bitter herbs dip in Charoset symbolically, and then we recline and recite the part about how Hillel would make the sandwich. Then starts the meal. So all we've eaten so far was a little vegetable. At the beginning, we ate the matzah, and we ate the bitter herbs, and then a sandwich. Now we start the meal. Now it's customary to begin the meal with eating the hard-boiled egg, dipped in salt water. Some people say the reason for the salt water is because salt water resembles tears. So we're trying to remember the tears. But salt water is a normal thing to use in a dip. It's a condiment, so people would dip the hard-boiled egg in the salt water. If you don't like hard-boiled eggs, you don't have to eat it. You don't have to eat the whole egg. If you do like it, you can eat any part of it is good enough. This is not a requirement, it's more custom. Now, I mentioned over here that you should leave room for the Afikoman. You start the meal, and then you eat a holiday meal, but make sure that you leave room in your system to eat the last piece of matzah, which is the most important piece of matzah of the night. So, eat in moderation. At the end of the meal, we have tzafun. Well, by the way, the meal is referred to as shulchan orech. Shulchan orech means the set table. That's the expression used for the meal. The table is set with all the food. Then we get safun, which means hidden. The Afikoman, we said before, was hidden. And now we're going to eat the hidden piece of matzah, the significance of which we discussed last week. But for right now, the point is that this is the end of the Seder in terms of eating. It's in place of the Pascal offering that we don't have physically. So we eat that piece of matzah to take the place of the Pascal offering, and we eat it while reclining. Again, within 4 minutes, we try to eat the Afikoman, which should be about, again, a half a matzah, an ounce worth of matzah. Once we eat the Afikoman, the only thing we're going to ingest after that are the next 2 cups of wine. We fill the 3rd cup of wine, and we recite the grace after meals. And right after that, we drink the 3rd cup, and then we fill the 4th cup. And we also fill a special cup for Elijah, which we're not going to drink. And then we open the door to the outside. So let's say you're in a room that there are several rooms to get you to the outside. You open up all the doors from the door of the room in which you're in up until, including the door to the outside. Yes?
Of all the prophets, why is Elijah selected as the one we pour the cup for?
Elijah is the prophet who's going to announce the coming of Mashiach. He's the prophet of redemption. And he's the only prophet that has been around throughout history. comes to every bris, he comes to every Seder. As I mentioned last week, he comes spiritually, not physically, because if he was going to drink everyone's wine, he would be arrested for drunk.
Prophesying while drunk.
So here, the cup for Elijah is poured. We open the door to the outside, and then there's a prayer, a very strong one, praying for God pouring his wrath on all these evil nations. And unfortunately, throughout Jewish history, Jews never had this problem. Who was it referring to? There was always some nation, or more than one, that wanted our destruction. And by extension, it refers to any evil that we have within ourselves as well. Whenever we talk about evil nations, in whichever context it is, it can be taken literally, but it is also taken to refer to our own internal evil. Then we recite the Hallel. I mentioned last week that Hallel is a collection of psalms from Psalm 113 through 118. We said two of the psalms before the meal. Those are the psalms that focus on the Exodus. Now we're going to say the remaining psalms that focus on the future. These are psalms of praise and are joyous, very joyous psalms. So when we finish the Hallel psalms, and that continues with other praises of God, other prayers that extol and praise God's greatness and what he does for us and what he will do for us. When we finish that part of the Haggadah, we drink the fourth cup, again while reclining. And then Rachtzah is, we say that God has accepted our prayers, and we declare next year in Jerusalem, meaning that by the time the Seder comes around next year, we will already be in Jerusalem, and the Seder will be different. We'll be eating the Paschal lamb, and the exile will be over. Now, there are many customs at this point to say a lot of different hymns, a lot of different songs. Chabad Haggadah doesn't have those hymns, not because they're not good, just that there are different customs, what was included in the Haggadah. One of those hymns is Echad Miyodea, who knows one? One is God in heaven and earth. Who knows two? Two are the tablets. Who knows three? Three are the patriarchs. Who knows four? Four are the matriarchs. Who knows five? Five books of Moses. Who knows six? The 6 orders of the Mishnah. Who knows 7? 7 days of the week. Who knows 8? The 8 days of circumcision. Who knows 9? The 9 months of gestation. Who knows 10? 10 commandments. Who knows 11? The 11 stars in the Joseph's dream. Who knows 12? The 12 tribes. Who knows 13? What's 13? The 13 attributes of mercy. It goes to 13. Some people try to go further. Who knows 14? The 14 volumes of Maimonides' work. Okay, but why do we say this the night of Passover? Because the main point of Passover is not just about physical freedom, it's about spiritual freedom that connects us to the giving of the Torah. So we want to feature all the different things that are related to Torah and to one God who gave us the Torah and everything else that followed from that. There's also a hymn, the very last hymn, called Chad Gadya, the one goat that the father bought for 2 zuzi, and the goat was eaten by, who was the goat eaten? By a cat. And the cat was bitten by the dog, and the dog was hit by a stick, and the stick was burnt by fire, and the fire was extinguished by water, and the water was drunk by an ox, and the ox was slaughtered by a slaughterer, a shochet, and the angel of death killed the shochet, and God kills the angel of death. Right, so someone once asked the question, the goat is innocent, so who's the villain here? The cat, because the cat ate the goat. So the cat is the villain. The dog who bites the cat is innocent because the dog is taking revenge for what the cat did. The stick is bad because it hit the dog. The fire is good because it burnt the stick. The water is bad because it extinguished the fire. The ox is good because it drank the water. The shochet is bad because he killed the ox. The angel of death is good because he killed the shochet, and God is bad. Doesn't work out. So something was wrong in the way we did this. So I don't know who said this, but he said, no, let's go back. The goat is good, innocent. The cat is bad for biting the goat, eating the goat. The dog is not good for biting the cat. The dog, who asked you to get involved? So it continues from there.
You mentioned lighting the candles, the special.
The women light. I should have mentioned it. The women light candles. That's why you're here. The women light. The women light the candles, of course, before the Seder begins, after dark. Okay. Did I leave anything else out?
The Kiddush is a special Kiddush this year.
Okay. Because this year, it's rare, it doesn't happen too often, it's not going to happen for another 20 years, that the Seder begins Saturday night, Shabbat, the end of Shabbat. What we do, normally at the end of Shabbat, we make Havdalah. It's a special ceremony to mark the end of the Shabbat. So we're marking the beginning of the holiday and the end of Shabbat, so we combine, we make the blessing on the wine, then we say the Kiddush prayer, then we look at the candles that are burning. We don't do anything. We just watch the candles. Then we say a special prayer for Havdalah. And then we say the blessing of Shechayanu. Whenever we come into a new holiday, there's a special blessing, thanking God for giving us the life to come to this point. So that's the text of the kit. But it's all in the Haggadah. It has the whole text. Yes?
How can you light the candles if you're coming from Shabbat?
Very good question. You can't light the candle coming from Shabbat, but you could take the candle from an existing flame. So what some people do is they have a yard-side candle that burns 24 hours and you light it from there. Or if you have a boiler, a water boiler that has a flame, a pilot light, you can light it from there. Or if you left some fire on the stove, which was on Shabbos you're supposed to cover it, but you can light it from there. On a holiday you're allowed to light fire. You're not allowed to ignite fire, but you can take it from another source of fire. Yes?
We were discussing the enemies of Israel and candles, and you had taught me neshek, what neshek really is.
Right. The word neshek is modern day Hebrew term for weapons. But neshek is also an acronym. Nerot, Shabbat, Kodesh, the candles of the Holy Sabbath. Once a woman who was in charge of distributing Shabbos candles to people was going through the customs in Israel, and they asked her, are you carrying any weapons? She says, yes, I am. I'm carrying a lot of neshek. She meant it innocently. She meant Shabbos candles. But when you tell an Israeli official that you're carrying weapons, got her a little into trouble. Yes?
When you open the door, does it matter which one it is? Like if you have a front and a back door?
It doesn't make a difference, as long as it opens to the outside.
Okay.
As I mentioned it last week, the custom is that the first night of Passover, we don't lock our outside doors. We don't have to keep them wide open, but we don't lock them because it's called a protected night. This is the night of protection, when God protects us, gives us more protection. Any other questions? Yes?
The first Seder and a second Seder, is there much of a difference?
There's no real difference between the two Seders. In Israel, they only have one Seder, but anything they do in Israel in one day, it takes us 2 days to do. So we have 2 days. The only difference is that according to an opinion of the Talmud, you can't eat the Paschal lamb, and therefore the Seder, after midnight. The deadline is midnight. So there's a dispute about that, but that's one opinion. So the first night of Passover, we're careful to end the Seder, at least the part of the Afikoman and the last 2 cups of wine, before midnight. The second Seder, which is of rabbinical origin, we're a little more lenient, and you can stretch out the Seder and go beyond midnight.
What is midnight now?
Now, midnight is not 12. Midnight, 12 is not midnight. Now there's daylight savings time, so midnight is something around 1, a little bit after 1 in Buffalo. So that's what we mean by midnight. Means the point in the middle of, literally the middle of the night, not 12. The reason I said before that daylight savings time is bad, especially if it would be all year round, is bad for the Jews, is because the morning service that we recite every morning can only be said at a certain time in the morning, not before.
Is that Mincha?
No, Shacharis, the morning service. If you had daylight savings time, it will probably not get light until 8 o'clock or later. And people who go to work will not be able to say their morning prayers. So it would be a terrible thing. So if they ever ask people to vote on it, don't vote for daylight savings time all year round. It's even better if they go back to get rid of daylight savings time altogether. It doesn't make any sense anymore.
Is the reason why there are 2 Seders outside of Israel and 1 in because the lighting of when Shabbos or sunset came was lit by fires across Israel, and so they weren't sure the exact day, so as a fence they built 2 holidays outside of Israel?
Right, not because of that. When the calendar was established, they didn't go by a calendar. They went by the testimony of witnesses in Jerusalem, determining whether the beginning of the month will be today or tomorrow, based on the sighting of the moon or the lack of sighting of the moon. And that would determine when the Passover would be, 15 days later. How would anyone know outside of Jerusalem? So originally they lit bonfires on hilltops, and that didn't work out because there were enemies. The Samaritans tried to deceive the people, and so they just lit bonfires randomly. So instead they used to send messengers to travel to the far-reaching places to tell them when the holiday would be. Those places where they would never reach, either because it was too far or because there were not too many Jews living there, they had to keep an extra day out of doubt. So even though we now have a calendar, we know exactly when the holiday begins, we follow the custom of our ancestors. That's the technical reason. There's a mystical reason that outside of Israel, you need 2 days to absorb the holiness that in Israel they can do in 1 day.
That's a complete answer. Thank you so much.
Thank you.